In today's video, I'm gonna do some shoe cobbling. I got these shoes from a thrift store, and they are Doc Martens, which are the ambassador leather, which means that they are really soft and they don't need any breaking in. I put them on in the store and they felt like slippers. And then later I looked them up and saw that it's actually a different type of leather, which is more expensive. So that was a good purchase. However, I didn't realize that the heel counter, which is a kind of a plasticky bit that goes on the back inside of the shoe, that it was completely busted and it was like cutting up my heels. So when I tried them on in the store, I didn't realize that was an issue because I didn't really walk around. I just saw if they fit. But when I got them home and put them on, it was like stabbing in the back of the heel. So when I inspected it, you could see that earlier in the video, that plasticky piece busted apart on both shoes and was like poking through the material where the like the there's like a piece of felt that goes over this heel counter. So I pulled it out in several pieces. It actually took a long time to pull it out because it's glued in so well. And then I reconstructed the shape and then traced the shape onto this material, which came from a company that sells kits where you can make your own shoes, and they offer classes, and that's where you can buy a lot of parts to fix your shoes. I watched a lot of YouTube videos trying to figure out how to do this because I didn't want to pay someone to try to fix them because I think that would have negated how much um, I spent on the shoes. It just wouldn't be worth it because the labor involved here is a lot. Even if somebody could have fixed this, this would cost probably more than the shoe itself, given that in a large city, services like that aren't cheap, even though cobblers are plentiful. Here I am, I found a piece of leather that actually it's something that my husband has because he has a lot of stuff for making clothes and odds and ends because he used to go to Mood, which is a huge fabric store in New York City, and they have um, they have a lot of fabrics that are really unique because they're one of a kind, and it's just like the end of the roll that they're using for some kind of production, and so there's a chance to find like designer fabrics and high quality leathers and things. So I found something from his stash that is probably meant to be a belt. So if I unfold it, it can serve for my purposes to go on top of the piece of the plasticky material to sort of make it smoother inside of there. And I'm sanding down the edge because I noticed that the edge is kind of thick, so I want to make sure that when my foot goes in there, this part, especially the top part, is going to be as smooth as possible and as seamless as possible so that it doesn't rub against the back of my heel. Obviously, even though there's a piece of leather covering it, I still wanted to make sure uh, that it's like smooth in there. And by the way, I've never done this. I didn't even know what a heel counter was. you can see here those plastic bits I have. They are shoe lasts that my husband 3D printed for me. And that's like a model of a foot, and it's only half because there's no point to print the whole piece because, well, it would be wasteful for this specific project because I only needed the form of the back of the heel. And the way this plasticky material works is that when you heat it, it supposedly gets really pliable, so you can form it to whatever you want, and then it will harden in that position. So that's the good thing about finding this shoe academy, because they have materials like that that they provide for their shoemaking classes. And again, this is all completely new to me, and I've never uh, really repaired shoes to this level. But it's really cool that nowadays you can find absolutely anything, any kind of DIY project you want online, and you'll probably be able to find exactly the type of material that you need for it. At first, I tried to heat it up and mold it on the shoe last, but that wasn't working. So I switched to just heating it up on a flat surface, and now I'm able to drape it over the shoe last, and it is very tacky and sticky and very soft and pliable, and it will mold exactly to this shoe last, which is really impressive. Like, this makes me want to make shoes for real. Here you can see I'm kind of trying to see if it's ready to take off, but it's not yet, so I'm gonna do the other side, and I'll probably just leave some pauses in throughout the video. If you're new to the channel, what I'm trying to accomplish here is sort of to tell my life story and to express what life in a large city is like and how it may be different from people who live in suburbs or other areas where there are certain things I feel like that are taken for granted. Like, for example, in the last video, I talked about how the laundry routine might be different. I've also talked extensively about the particular challenges we have had in the last two apartments, living in very small accommodations with children, and that's sort of what I'm going for documenting here is life in a large city, DIY projects. There is a chronological timeline for how I'm trying to go about this. Not really in terms of like overall, I'm not going from the beginning to like more present day, but the episodes do have a bit of a flow between subjects. So if you are interested, curious, I do try to do a combination of explaining what I'm doing in the video as well as talking about bigger overarching subjects and events. So at this point in the shoe fixing, I'm ready to glue in the back because I was successfully able to take those off the mold and they're stiff now, and I'm really impressed with how they are like perfect stiffness and everything. Here's the leather that's supposed to go inside also. Oh, the reason I'm doing that is because I wanted to get it wet so to straighten it out, so I was just drying it out. And I did dry it for a long time, like I hung it up to dry, so I'm coming back to this. And I had to rip up the insole a little bit, so I ripped it up about halfway so that I could get this piece all the way to the bottom as far as I could, and then the insole, I would glue it back in the position that it was. So the glue I'm using is just some whatever shoe glue from Amazon. It's probably not ideal. It feels a lot like crazy glue, that it will stay liquid for a few seconds, but then it turns super hard. And perhaps there's something better to use, maybe something more pliable. I can tell you, I didn't get the most perfect result with this, because even though the fit was really, really good, I just don't think the glue has the ability to really work all that well in this application. I've used the same glue to reattach soles to shoes. Actually, previously I had gotten a pair of Uggs that were really cool. They're secondhand, and I wanted to dye them to make them a brighter purple. They were already purple, but I wanted to dye them with RIT dye. And in the last video, you see me dyeing some clothing with RIT dye also. So I did do that frequently. And since Uggs are a natural material, they take to dye really well. So I know that to dye things, you have to have the water as hot as you can, preferably boiling. And I did that. I put in a few tea kettles full of boiling water, and what happened was that the sole instantly separated from the shoe. So even though it did a fantastic dyeing job, the sole was no longer connected, and all it was just glued down. So what I did was just pick up some of this shoe glue and glue the sole back on, which worked fine, and I had those shoes for many years before they got like really stained, and the sole never came off. But the only issue was keeping it neat while gluing, because I glued it back on and there was all this glue like seeping out from between the sole. It was like kind of dripping down the edge of the sole, which is like a piece of foam. Uggs are actually pretty inexpensive shoes to manufacture. It's just that sheepskin, the pattern, they cut it out like that, and then they just glue it onto like a really cheap foam sole. And so they're pretty easy to like take apart and put back together. But anyways, there was some like drips of this glue, which is glossy, so it wasn't that big of a deal, but it is difficult to not to do projects like that. It's just very difficult to keep it neat. And I did actually start watching some cobblers channels. It's really cool, like the craftsmanship that people do with shoes, or they'll restore handbags and things like that. It's fascinating if you're into this kind of DIY stuff. So this is a new project. The Where I left off with the Doc Martens was that I glued everything into place, including the leather piece that would kind of conceal that whole support operation. What I'm doing here is I'm restoring, refurbishing, or whatever, a pair of my husband's shoes that are Campers brand. And he told me he didn't want them anymore, so I'm fixing them up a little bit and I'm gonna sell them. I actually did end up selling these eventually after a few months. So what I'm doing is I'm buffing the leather a little bit, and I'm gonna be putting some leather color on the black part, because in the front especially it had like faded out a little bit. And I've also used the magic eraser to clean up the orange soles, which is like a big feature of these shoes, are the orange soles. So I'm just going to be putting some of this shoe leather on. I'm not super happy with this brand. I don't even know if I show it here. But I also have used it to color my Uggs. I have a pair of blue ones, I mean black ones. And you know what? I didn't like it. I put it on and it was kind of stiff because Uggs are a little bit like fuzzy. They're suede. So I immediately thought that it was more like, it was less like an ink and more like a paint, I guess. But after a couple of weeks, it completely absorbed, and I did actually like it. I haven't experimented with different types. This is just one I grabbed at random. So here I'm applying it all around, and then you'll see that even once it dries, I can still like, um, it still wipes off some. So I use like a cloth to just kind of get rid of the excess color. I've watched some people restoring handbags online, and they do give recommendations for good dyes. I think D'Angelo maybe is a brand that's really good. I don't think this one's it. I think I just grabbed something random. So here I am getting all the tape off. The shoes are ready. I'm gonna put a little bit of like a little bit of conditioner on them, and then they're ready for their new home. By the way, since I don't think I come back to this, the Doc Martens did turn out fine. The issue was, I think the glue that I was using on the inside is kind of stiff, and it's really hard to keep it neat. And it did get sort of on the inside part of the shoe where it dried in this kind of like a rough, scaly sort of a surface, which is not super comfortable. Like if I wasn't wearing any socks, I could probably feel it. Also, I'm not sure how well that's going to hold everything together. I think all the components came out just perfect. I'm just not sure that that particular glue is going to be able to hold it together long term. But they are totally wearable, and I have worn them out many times and they seem just fine. At this point, I'm about ready, done with the shoes, and the next project we're going to be looking at is making sauerkraut. I know this is a huge hodgepodge of things, and I don't mind. I don't mind that. You get to see how the back of a shoe is made or fixed, and also you get to make some kraut with me, and you don't have to make the kraut. So the way that this is put together is really simple, and for some reason I always mess it up in some way. But what you do is you weigh the amount of materials you're using. So if you're using cabbage and or carrot or whatever, you want to measure how much you have. And the sort of backwards thing that I'm doing here is I'm measuring the weight and then I'm subtracting the part I'm cutting away, which is pretty pointless. What I should do is just cut it to the point that I need it and then measure everything together. And then when you have, I use grams because it's division by 10 and it's easier then to figure out a percentage of salt that you need. So I use a 2% brine, which means that I need 2% salt by weight. For example, if you have 1 kilogram of cabbage, which is 1,000 grams, then you would calculate that 2% of that is 20 grams. So for 1 kilogram of cabbage, you need 20 grams of salt. And you could also do 3% if you wanted for a saltier brine. I find that 2% works really well. And the reason why I measured out is because salt has a different weight depending on what type of salt it is. So volume wise, for example, kosher salt is like hollow and they're flakes, so it takes up more space, but it's lighter. But for like salinity, you really want to get the actual weight of the salt. And it is recommended to use the kosher salt for this, or sea salt, and to stay away from regular table salt, because that has additives that can prevent the fermentation process from taking place. So it's just a matter of chopping up the cabbage, measuring how much you have, measuring how much salt you would need, massaging the cabbage with the salt, leaving it in a container for an hour or two just to release some juices, because those juices is where you're really going to need the brine that will cover it. If you don't have enough brine, like if for some reason the cabbage doesn't release enough moisture, which can happen, then you can add your own brine, which you still just want to make it a 2% saltwater solution. So then you would just do a 2% of your water weight would be salt. So here I'm measuring out the salt, and I didn't always have a gram scale or a scale. So I did figure out a formula that was roughly estimated just by like amount of salt, like a teaspoon or tablespoon or whatever. So it is also possible to do this without a food scale, and you can find ratios online that tells you like per pound of cabbage how much salt you want to use. Just be mindful that different salt weighs different amounts, so that's why it's better to measure it, but not necessary. So it's looking like in this video I'm not gonna get a chance to really talk too much about apartment situation. The thing I wanted to get into was the neighbors and how intense that has been, even though things did settle down. So I think I'm gonna save that for another day when I'm just doing a straightforward pickup cleaning, so I can just blab through the whole thing. A little bit about what it takes to make these videos. In this one, I'm just flying through the narration because there are things on screen that I'm talking about, but it does take a while to get the videos together, edit them together, even though it doesn't really look like there's too much involved. There's not always like the best camera angles or things like that, but just compiling the video itself does take me a few hours, and then doing the voiceover will usually take me a while because I'm taking out a lot of the hemming and humming and the and like, and I still have a lot of those in there, and I would love to get to the point where I don't use the where I don't rely on those so much, because I think like even an awkward pause is better than somebody going like that. So it's something I'm working on. I think it's better to get these out in some form than not to get them out. So I'm definitely not being super perfectionist about anything here. Back to the kraut, as you can see, there's a lot of liquid that's formed, and that's all just juice from what came out of it from when it was just sitting in the salt. And how I finish it off is I put a bag inside and I fill that bag with water. It's recommended to fill that bag with also with the brine, because then if it leaks, you'll just have more brine. But I think out of like years of making kraut, I've never like had it leak, maybe just one time. So it's not a big deal. I don't bother making a brine for the bag. And finally, before we move on to the last segment, it takes about a week to have the sauerkraut sit out at room temperature, and then about a couple of weeks in the fridge, and I think that makes it really good. In this last part, I'm cleaning the fridge POV style. This is something that happens maybe every couple of months, I guess. And if I'm doing it like this, where I take stuff out, I'll unplug it just to keep it from beeping at me when the temperature gets like high enough. At the end here, you'll see my adorable child reciting the alphabet on the fridge magnets. And the last thing I'll leave you with is this APC that I'm using is vinegar and water, half vinegar, half water, and a few splashes of dish soap. And I find that it cuts through the grease wonderfully. Even though it sort of smells like vinegar a lot, it does dissipate within a few minutes, and I find this one is better than any cleaner I've purchased at a retail location. And I know that Mac from Midwest Magic Cleaning swears by this Mr. Clean Freak, and I have used it, and I am telling you, I prefer the vinegar APC more than even that product. Okay, here comes the cuteness.
A B C D E F G H I J